So, okay, let's get going. Does anyone remember what we were doing the last time? Hmm? Okay, last time we were talking about the sophists, and I was trying to tell you that one of the things that the sophists did was that apart from worshipping goddess Sophia, they also created a human-centric universe. Okay, now I'll introduce you to a concept today, which is very much applicable to the sophists. And when we do the medieval period, this will become even more important. So what you have to remember is that the sophists, though they are not seen in a proper, they're not seen in a positive light, they still contributed to the emergence of certain tendencies. And these tendencies uh, basically have some bearing even on the modern period. They certainly have a bearing on the medieval period. The medieval period is that which follows the ancient period. Now, please remember that the medieval period is something that begins with the rise of Christianity, and you'll also see that it's the medieval period, or the Middle Ages as they are also called the Dark Ages. So if you look at all these, uh, if you basically look at all these developments, they have something to do with the sophists. I told you that people like Anaxagoras, they are the ones who basically they are the ones who uh, basically contributed much to Sophism. By that I mean they believe that by worshipping Sophia, they got knowledge, and that this particular knowledge is something that could be used for the betterment of themselves. So look at if you look at the idea of the sophists, I told you Socrates also technically is a sophist because he also worshipped Sophia, but he is unlike other sophists because of the fact that he is someone who did not believe in selling knowledge, which the other sophists were doing. But it would be incomplete if I just tell you that there were the sophists and there was Socrates. There is one figure that you should remember, a very important figure again in the larger scheme of things. And this person was Protagoras. Now, if you look at Protagoras, Protagoras defied the sophists, defied the idea of worshipping Sophia, and he basically started, or rather not started, he represented a particular school of thought in ancient Greece, which was something that spilled over into the medieval period, which is when Christendom dominated. And he also was someone who basically gave an alternative understanding of the world. Now, if you look at the surface, they believe that there is a goddess called Sophia. Now, in the Greek tradition, there is a particular word. It's called Gnosticism, Gnosticism, or Gnostic thinking,
Sir, can you repeat?
Cism, Gnosticism. Okay, even today there are Gnostics, but people do not refer to them as Gnostics. the English pronunciation has taken over, and they pronounce now as Gnostics. And Gnostics, as such, came into the limelight once again in the medieval period. And when we are doing the medieval period, I'll tell you how the Gnostics uh, basically differed with the traditional idea of Christianity. I'll talk about that when we come to the medieval period. But what you have to remember is that somebody like Protagoras, Protagoras denied the existence of all the Greek gods. He denied the existence of Zeus. He denied the existence of Apollo. He denied the existence of Dionysius. He believed that the universe in itself was something that could not only take care of itself, but could also take care of people or take care of all the living creatures. So, in that sense, not only because he's a Greek, I'm now pronouncing that as Gnostic. Not only was he a Gnostic, he seemed to have uh, he seemed to have what should I say advocated. He seems to have advocated an alternative perception of the universe itself. Now, when we talk about Protagoras and when we talk about, because we are still in the Greek period, I will pronounce it as the Greeks did. Gnostic, since he was agnostic, he also had a bone to pick with Socrates. Protagoras and Socrates did not see eye to eye because Socrates, though he defied the rest of the sophists, he didn't defy the idea. He didn't defy the idea that Sophia existed and that it is through the worship of Sophia that you will get knowledge. He didn't do that. Okay, so if you look at, if you basically look at Protagoras, he was one of the opponents of Socrates. But very interestingly, you will find that Protagoras is somebody who had a little bit, a smidgen of influence upon Plato. So, when we are talking about Plato, if you look at all the influences that were there on Plato, you will see that one of the earliest influences on Plato was that which was uh, the Eleatic school. Parmenides and his philosophy had a great deal of impact on Plato's thinking. And apart from the Eleatic school, apart from Parmenides, I also told you that Plato was a mathematician, and because he was a mathematician, Pythagoras, who was both a mathematician and a mystic philosopher, his influence is also something that you will find on Plato. Now, let's try to understand each of these influences. Well, apart from these are all philosophical influences. Apart from the philosophical influences that I have mentioned now, I'll go through them again in a bit of detail right now in today's class. Uh, you will find that a very important uh, event that took place in Plato's lifetime was the war between Athens and Sparta. Athens and Sparta, two police, P-O-L-E-I-S, not police, police, because polis is the singular, P-O-L-I-S. These two police were at war with each other. The war lasted 18 years. And at the end of 18 years, the Athenians were defeated by the Spartans. So it was at that particular time that you will find uh, it was at that particular time that you will find this great oration or a great speech by the leader of Athens, whose name was Pericles. So the Periclean oration was something that influenced Plato quite substantially. So you see, there are all these eclectic. Eclectic essentially means different things, but not necessarily consistent with each other. Okay, that is what makes them eclectic, because they are not consistent with each other. Sometimes they oppose each other. But these eclectic influences on Plato led to his building of philosophy and of writing his books. Now, Plato also followed the dialectical method for his writing, but you must understand that the dialectics that you find in Plato are very, very different from the, uh, what should I say? They are very, very different from the uh, dialectics that you see in the modern period. Hegel revived the dialectics, but he did so at the level of thought. Marx used the dialectics to show how changes in history took place. And you'll also see that you'll also see that Engels, Friedrich Engels, also used the dialectics, and he used it in a different form, in a different kind of a way. So now you're seeing so many different influences on Plato, and Plato chose the dialectic as the method to convey his philosophy. If you remember, I told you in the last class that there are two perceptions of, there are basically two perceptions of, yeah, sorry about that. There are two uh, perceptions. One of the perceptions about the dialectics that you see is that it is written in the form of a dialogue. And this, the second perception that you see in Plato is that the dialectic is a methodology. So first, let's try to understand why Plato chose to have the, what should I say, why Plato chose the dialogue. I was trying to tell you that there are two perceptions about Socrates. One is that Socrates existed as portrayed by Plato. He was the teacher of Plato in many ways. This is one perception. The other perception that exists about Socrates is that he has been used as a, what should I say? He has been used as a mouthpiece for Plato's philosophy. Now, if you ask me, I find enough evidence to believe in the first perception, which is Socrates existed the way in which Plato portrayed him, and that he used dialectics as a methodology. I went through this with you before, but for the sake of continuity, I'm recapitulating this again. Please remember that when you say a dialogue, when you just use the word dialogue, it can be a conversation between two people, okay? And or it can be a conversation between representatives of different nations. But whatever it is, a dialogue is usually between two people or two parties, and it is something that is used in order to take care of a problem. So even in the modern sense, the dialogue is something that is seen as a conflict resolution mechanism. It is seen as a conflict resolution mechanism. Uh, and it is probably striking in Plato. I gave you an example of how a dialogue progresses. Again, for the sake of continuity, I'm going to repeat it. Most of the time, without our knowing, we use this dialectical dialogue, okay? Starting with something like, hello, how are you? If I ask this question, hello, how are you? I'm already anticipating a response of a certain kind. I expect you to say, or I anticipate that you'll say that, you know, uh, I'm fine, thank you. Or you might end up, you might say, I'm not doing very well. So if you if you look at this mechanism, this dialogue, you will see that there is an anticipation of one or two or maybe even three responses. I don't when if I say to you, hello, how are you? I don't expect you to tell me Honda cars are not selling very well. I don't expect you to tell me that. I don't anticipate a response like that. Okay. So a dialogue is a dialectic because of the fact that it poses a question and anticipates a response which may be X or Y. Like I said, if you say, how are you? You are either saying, I'm fine, thank you, or you're saying, I'm not doing very well, I'm not keeping very well, or any of these things. Now, if you read the dialogues of Plato, I'm not talking about the Republic as yet. If you read the dialogues of Plato, the dialogues of Plato are those which are written in this particular fashion. Plato used it as a methodology to demonstrate the rightness or the wrongness of a proposition. This is what he learned from Socrates. Okay? The rightness or the wrongness of a proposition. Because what Socrates used to do was to question people, and if they responded with a particular answer, he would question them again. So Socrates actually had an elaborate plan in his mind, and this plan was aimed at making sure that people knew the rightness of things and not the wrongness of it. So he already, when he asked the first question, he asked it in such a way that by the end of the time, by the end of the dialogue, you will find that, you know, there is uh, there is the establishment of the rightness of the idea that Socrates has in his mind. So the conversations between Protagoras and Socrates, the conversations between Glaucon and Socrates, the dialogues rather, these are between Anaxagoras and Socrates, all will show you that it is the intention of Socrates to begin a certain kind of questioning with the explicit purpose of establishing his idea as the correct idea. Now, let's be very, very careful here. If you say that he's trying to say that his idea is the correct idea, it doesn't mean that he's offering an explanation. Please remember what Plato said. What Socrates said. The only thing that I know is that I don't know. That is what he said, right? So he's not trying to tell you that I am right and you are wrong. What he was trying to do was to demonstrate the wrongness of the ideas that were being perpetuated by the sophists. The wrongness of the ideas that were being perpetuated by the sophists. That is what you have to remember. He's not trying to say, listen, I believe that India is a great country. Now you believe India is not a great country. Okay? So I start with the intention to prove that India is a great country. That's not what it is with Plato. I'm sorry, with Socrates. With Socrates, if somebody says India is not a great country, he will take up a certain series of questions which will ultimately culminate in the demonstration of his opponent's idea that India is not a great country. The wrongness of that idea. That is what you must understand. It is the wrongness of the idea that Socrates basically proved through his dialogues. So, if you are looking at the dialogues, dialogues are also used in the Republic, the work that was used by, that was written by Plato, his magnum opus. Plato wrote a number of books. People think he wrote three things. People think he wrote only, you know, the Republic, the Statesman, and Laws. That is not true. He wrote a number of other books. I'm not giving you the names because these translations are not correct translations. The Statesman is not a correct translation of the Greek word that was used by Plato. Neither is Laws a correct translation of the word used by Plato in the Greek language. So that's the reason why I'm refraining from talking about the titles of other books, because they don't really reflect what it is that Plato is doing. In fact, the Republic itself is not a correct name for the book that Plato wrote. The Greek title of the book is something which is very, very different. And even though everybody calls uh, Aristotle the father of politics, not political science, please remember, political science is a new phenomenon. Politics is an old phenomenon, but political science is something that happened towards the end of the 19th century and 20th century. Okay, even today, in most British universities, departments are called Department of Politics, just as you'd have a Department of Economics. You don't say economic science. You don't say sociological science. Political science came into being for a completely different reason. I'll talk about that later if you're interested. Uh, but otherwise, it is politics. So most people will tell you that Aristotle is the father of politics. I don't particularly enjoy these kind of, what should I say? Uh, I don't particularly enjoy this thing that so and so is the father, so and so is. There are no fathers for disciplines. Disciplines emerge over a period of time due to the exigencies of history. So there are no fathers. Definitely there are no mothers. We know that for a fact. Now, the Socratic influence is something that you can see in the dialogues that Plato wrote. The influence of Pythagoras is a little more complicated. Pythagoras also had a great deal of influence, but that particular influence is not as straightforward as the influence of Socrates. What you see is that Pythagoras was not just a mathematician, as many people think. Pythagoras was, like I said, he was primarily a mystic philosopher. And his way of demonstrating the truth of something was through the use of mathematics. And for the Greeks, mathematics primarily meant geometry. And the Greeks attached a great deal of importance in geometry to symmetry. So if you are looking at, what should I say? If you are looking at this particular phenomenon in Plato, what Plato is basically doing is that he is also using mathematics in order to make, in order to build, if you like, arguments that have to establish the truth of something. So Plato became a mathematician, and the influence of Pythagoras is there on him in that way. This is perhaps the slightly more, there's nothing simple about Plato, but this might be a slightly more simpler uh, influence of Pythagoras on Plato. The more complicated one is the one that pertains to Pythagoras' idea of the soul and the birth and rebirth of human beings. Here you have to remember that Pythagoras' belief of birth and death and rebirth don't coincide with the ancient Indian idea of the soul and its rebirth after death. In the Indian system, there is a very, very strong component, which is karma, and karma is derived out of dharma. And there you will see that you need not be born only as a human being. In your next life, depending on your karma, you can be born as a donkey, you can be born as an ant, or anything. Because the Indian view of the soul is that the entire universe is something which has a soul. Everything in the universe has a soul, including what we consider non-living objects. As far as India is concerned, ancient India is concerned, there is nothing which is non-living. Stones, sand, all of them are living and they have a soul. That is not what you find among the Greeks, and that is certainly not what you find in Pythagoras. Pythagoras believed that only human beings had souls, a belief that got carried into Christianity as well. This is something that got carried into Christianity. And so when you talk about souls, so to speak, your own in the context of ancient Greece, in the context of Pythagoras, the soul is something that exists in a body and is reborn after death again as a body. This is a slightly more complex, uh, what should I say? It's a slightly more complex influence on Plato, because you'll understand this when we do the realm of forms in Plato. And you'll see that human beings only are the ones who have a soul. The human body is the only living creature that is a repository of the soul as such. So this is the influence that you see of Pythagoras on Plato. So you have the defeat in the Peloponnesian War with the Spartans. The war with the Spartans is called the Peloponnesian War because it was fought in Peloponnese, the province of Peloponnese. It is like Kurukshetra is where the Pandavas and the Kauravas fought. Similarly, you have Peloponnese as the area where you find there was a war, so that Periclean oration is a very important thing. The dialogue of Plato is an equally important thing. Pythagoras, not many people know it, but is a huge influence. And I've run out of time. Protagoras, despite being the enemy, of Socrates, so to speak, enemy in terms of not enemy as enemy, his ideas being antithetical to Socrates' ideas, you will find that he is also an influence. And this influence has to be seen in conjunction with the influence of Parmenides. Unless you put these two together, you will not be able to understand how Protagoras and his Gnosticism were an influence on Plato. Well, I'm sure you have to go to another class, so I don't want to delay you. Thank you very much for coming and for being here. Do we have the evening class today or should we start tomorrow? Thank you, thank you. The evening class I want to do, you remember, I also have to, thank you. Okay, we'll start the evening class tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, Kavya. So we'll start the evening class. Thank you, Varshita. We'll start the evening class tomorrow in order to understand the histories of histories and evolution of institutions. Since we have only started today, I don't want to bombard you with so much in one day. We'll start tomorrow. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you.